That single solid block of gray dough broke a man's teeth before it saved his life. Number 12 was made from something you would normally feed to a stray horse. Number 4 caused a literal riot in the southern camps. And by the time we get to number 1, you are going to see a meal so desperate, it was hidden from history books because it was too gruesome to admit. This is not a video about cooking. This is a video about staying alive. During the American Civil War, millions of young men left their farms and families to fight. But the real enemy wasn't the man across the battlefield. It was the screaming, agonizing pain in their own stomachs. Supplies lines failed. Winter froze the ground solid. And these boys were forced to eat things that would make a modern stomach violently ill. They had to get creative, or they had to die. Number 15. This was the meal men turned to when the supply wagons disappeared in the mud. It was called hardtack. In simple terms, it was a thick cracker made from flour, water, and a pinch of salt. Its survival value was absolute because it literally never went bad. You could leave it in a damp haversack for 6 months, wipe off the mold, and still eat it. In the muddy camps of Virginia in 1862, soldiers called them tooth dullers. They had to smash them with the butts of their rifles just to take a bite. It was miserable. But it kept their hearts beating for one more day. Number 14. This was the meal men made when all they had left were crumbs and grease. They called it kush. It is just stale cornmeal fried in whatever bacon fat they could scrape from the bottom of a pan. Why did it matter? Calories. Pure, heavy, heart-stopping calories that gave a freezing soldier the energy to march 20 miles in the snow. During the long marches through Georgia, soldiers would gather around tiny, smoky fires, frying this mush until it was black. It tasted like burnt dirt. But in the freezing cold, a warm stomach was the only comfort a boy had left. Number 13. This was the meal the government forced you to eat to stop your teeth from falling out. Desiccated vegetables. They were giant, rock-hard bricks of dehydrated cabbage, turnips, and carrots pressed together by machines. The survival value was clear, it stopped scurvy. But it was so foul, soldiers called them desecrated vegetables. In the brutal winter camps of 1863, men would boil these bricks for hours, watching the water turn into a smelly, murky green sludge. This was not cooking. This was medicine. And they swallowed it down just to survive the night. Number 12. This was the drink men brewed when the naval blockades choked off the outside world. Roasted acorn coffee. Real coffee was too expensive, so they gathered raw acorns from the forest floor, roasted them over an open flame until they were black, and ground them into a bitter powder. It kept morale from collapsing. The warmth provided a psychological shield against the terror of war. Young boys far from home would sit under the oak trees before dawn, sipping this dark, bitter water, trying to remember what their mother's kitchen smelled like. That was enough. Number 11. This was the meat you ate when the smell alone would knock a normal person out. Salt pork. It was essentially slabs of fat, heavily cured in salt and packed in wooden barrels. It was cheap, and the extreme salt content meant it wouldn't rot in the blistering summer heat. But by the time it reached the front lines at Gettysburg, the barrels were often coated in slime. Soldiers had to wash it in a creek just to get the salt crust off. They ate it raw. They ate it burnt. They ate it because the alternative was staring at a shallow grave. Here is what no one tells you about starvation. It changes the way your brain works. After 3 days with no food, you stop dreaming about your family. You stop dreaming about winning the war. You only dream about bread. Real, soft, warm bread. Your vision blurs. Your hands shake. And suddenly, the dirt on the ground stops looking like dirt. It starts looking like a place to search for roots. This was the reality for hundreds of thousands of boys. They were not fighting for glory anymore. They were fighting for their next meal. Number 10. This was the meal men invented out of pure, aggressive frustration. Hellfire stew. It was simply hardtack crackers crushed into a powder and boiled violently in bacon grease and water. The survival value was efficiency. You didn't have to chew it, and it went down fast when the enemy cannons started firing. Soldiers on night watch would boil this in tin cups over tiny, hidden fires. It burned the roof of their mouths and left a greasy film on their tongues. But the intense heat tricked their starving bodies into feeling full. Number 9. This was the meal that killed almost as many men as the bullets did. Foraged green apples and raw, uncooked field corn. When the rations stopped, starving armies marched through farm fields and stripped them bare, eating the crops raw right off the stalk. It was free, and it was immediate. But the human stomach cannot process massive amounts of raw, unripe starch. In the camps of Maryland, this desperate diet caused sweeping waves of dysentery. Men died in agony just hours after eating. This was not food. This was a deadly mistake driven by absolute hunger. Number 8. This was the meal that literally grew out of the dust when all other crops burned. Goober peas, also known as peanuts. They were incredibly cheap to grow and packed with dense, life-saving protein. When the Southern armies were completely cut off from supply chains, entire regiments survived by digging up peanuts. They would boil them in salt water or roast them until they cracked. As they marched through the ruined roads of Virginia, the sound of thousands of men cracking peanut shells filled the air. It was a humble little nut. But it held an entire army together. Number 7. This was the meal men created to try and remember what happiness tasted like. Hardtack pudding. They would soak those rock-hard crackers overnight until they turned into a paste, then mix in stolen brown sugar or smashed wild blackberries if they could find them. It provided a massive sugar rush, a rare burst of energy. In the terrifying quiet hours before a battle, sharing a tin plate of sweet, purple mush was a profound act of brotherhood. For 10 minutes, they weren't soldiers. They were just kids eating a treat. Number 6. This was the bread you baked when you didn't even own a pan. Ash cake. It was a simple dough of cornmeal and water, wrapped in a large cabbage leaf, and buried directly into the glowing white ashes of a campfire. It required zero equipment and cooked fast. Sentries standing watch in the dead of winter would pull these charred lumps from the fire, brush off the gray soot, and bite into the dense, smoky center. The grit of the ash ground against their teeth with every bite. But a full stomach meant you could survive another freezing night on duty. This is where things get intensely personal. If you read the letters these soldiers sent home, they rarely talk about generals or tactics. They talk about their stomachs. A boy named Elijah wrote to his mother in 1863, begging her not to send clothes, but to send a single jar of apple butter. He said he would trade his boots for it. These letters reveal a heartbreaking truth. The greatest battles of the Civil War were not fought on hills or in valleys. They were fought inside the human body, every single day, against the relentless gnawing of starvation. Number 5. This was the meal where men simply stopped caring about what was crawling in their bowl. Bug-infested bean soup. It was standard military-issue dried beans, boiled in a massive iron pot. But the beans were almost always full of white weevils and maggots. The survival value? Nobody threw it away. The bugs were extra protein. At the Siege of Petersburg, men would joke about the bugs adding flavor to the broth. They skimmed the dead insects off the top, laughed with hollow eyes, and drank every last drop. This was not cooking. This was survival. Number 4. This was the drink men brewed when the field hospitals ran completely out of medicine. Swamp root tea. They ripped sassafras roots and wild herbs from the muddy riverbanks and boiled them into a thick, fragrant tea. It acted as a mild painkiller and helped settle violently sick stomachs. In the humid, disease-ridden swamps of the Deep South, this wild remedy kept fever-stricken men from collapsing on the march. It tasted like bitter earth and pine. But when the doctors had nothing left to give, the dirt beneath their feet was their only doctor. Number 3. This was the bread you cooked using the very weapon you used to kill. It was called slush. Soldiers would mix cornmeal and bacon grease into a thick dough, roll it into a snake, and wrap it directly around the steel ramrod of their musket. They held the gun over the fire until the dough cooked. It was the ultimate multitasking survival hack. You didn't need a kitchen, you just needed your rifle. The grease dripped into the fire, hissing and smoking, while men crouched in the mud, eating off the barrel of a gun. It was a dark, poetic reality of war. Number 2. This was the meal men turned to when the food was entirely, completely gone. Roasted pine needles and tree bark. You boil the needles for a harsh, vitamin-rich tea, and you scrape the soft inner bark of pine trees to chew on. It has almost 0 calories, but the survival value was psychological. It gave the stomach something to physically break down. During the most brutal winter blockades, skeleton-thin men wandered the forests like ghosts, stripping the trees bare just to stop the physical pain of an empty stomach. That was enough. Number 1. This was the meal that proved exactly how far a human being will go to stay alive. Boiled shoe leather and rotten animal bone broth. During the brutal siege of Vicksburg, thousands of soldiers and civilians were trapped with no food for weeks. When the mules and rats were eaten, they turned to their own clothing. They boiled leather belts and shoes for hours to soften the hide into a chewable gelatin, and smashed old, discarded bones to boil the marrow. They swallowed pieces of their own uniforms. This was the absolute limit of human endurance. It was gruesome. It was horrific. But it kept them breathing. When you look back at these meals, you realize something profound. Human beings are incredibly hard to kill. We will adapt to the darkest, dirtiest, most painful conditions imaginable just to see the sunrise one more time. The next time you sit down at your dinner table and complain that your food is a little too cold, or a little too bland, remember the boys who ate ashen leather in the freezing mud. I have a challenge for you. Make a simple bowl of plain oatmeal or cornmeal this week. Eat it without sugar. Taste it, and just be grateful for the peace you have. Tell me down in the comments, which of these extreme survival meals shocked you the absolute most?